What's up, everybody? Welcome again to the Chasing Creativity Podcast. This is episode 20 with music producer and composer Acoustic Labs. All right, episode 20. So, man, crazy. We are just blasting through this year, just past Christmas, heading into the new year. I just want to say thank you to everyone who is listening to the episodes, who has come on and joined as a guest. Really, just in the spirit of the holidays and the spirit of Christmas, I really thank everyone who is listening and who has joined, because it's been just the coolest thing for me to be able to do this, and I just am so excited going into 2019 to be able to continue to do so. So that's it. Thank you all. I hope you had an awesome holiday season, and I hope you guys are all getting ready for 2019. Now, as we jump into the episode today, a couple things first. The track that you just heard here at the beginning of the episode was an untitled track, from 1 equals 0. Now, if you'd like to learn about more about 1 equals 0, you can find them at soundcloud.com/1-0 FFICIAL. Like 0 is the O for official. So 1-official. Switch out the O for a 0. They are a friend of the podcast. And if you are interested in having your music shared out at the beginning of an episode, simply just email me or write me on Instagram. So email is chasingcreativitypodcast@gmail.com. And of course, on Instagram at chasing.creativity.podcast. Now, today's episode is with a composer, a guitarist. I don't think you can even say guitarist because he plays so many instruments, including a Ronroco, Erhu, and a Guitarviol. So he's going to be able to explain that a lot better as the process of incorporating lots of instruments into the music that he writes. But really, I would say the music is focused around acoustic guitar. He's a composer. He's a music producer. He's done acoustic covers. He's done pieces for film, pieces that fit to film, television, games, commercials. He's done a lot. He has 12 albums out. So if you go and search him on Spotify, of course, his name is Acoustic Labs. That's his title as a working musician. That's the place kind of you can find all his music. But yeah, 12 albums on Spotify. And he has a new album out called Glass Harbor. And that's really where him and I began speaking, is speaking about potentially coming on the podcast. And he actually was on his way to, or he was in New Zealand at the time and working on this new album. And he thought, hey, when he gets back to the States, we can figure out a good time to sync up and talk about the music. So new album, of course, Glass Harbor, written while he was in New Zealand, or inspired a lot by his trip to New Zealand, which I think ended up being something like 6 months. And so we get into that today. So really, really beautiful music, and extremely talented. So I hope you do enjoy it. As we jump into today's episode, we will be playing a track from his most recent release of Glass Harbor. The track is called True Haven. And again, so if you'd like to, if you'd like to go check out his music, places to find him, I would say YouTube. So he has a lot on YouTube, and a lot of his music has a visual component. So I would highly recommend checking him out on YouTube. That's youtube.com/Acoustic Labs. Also, Spotify. So if you search Acoustic Labs on Spotify, you can find him there. He does have, you can go and purchase his music. I saw his albums are all available on Amazon. So go and check that out. And lastly, on Patreon. Go support him on Patreon. So Patreon's this awesome way for artists to put up their content and people to support them on a regular basis, so they can get access to more music or whatever it is. So he does have a Patreon. It's www.patreon.com/Acoustic Labs. So that's it. We're going to keep it kind of short. I don't want to, go on and on about things that I could maybe not even say as well as the guest, right? Who wants to hear me blabber on here for an hour? So we're going to jump right into the episode. And last couple things before doing so. If you are enjoying these episodes, please just go and, if you don't mind, rating and reviewing on, say, iTunes or Spotify or Google Play or Stitcher, wherever you listen. It makes a huge impact for the show. It lets more people have access to the show, right? If there's more ratings and reviews, it's going to be easier to find on, say, iTunes podcasts or wherever you search for podcasts. So if you're enjoying it, please go do so. That makes a huge difference. And that's really it. We're going to continue to knock out episodes, and we're going to continue right through the new year. So I think the next Wednesday would be, that'll be the 2nd. So right after New Year's. So we're going to continue to release. So look for that episode on the 2nd. And that's really it. So I hope you have an awesome new year. I hope you enjoy this episode. And I look to speak with you all again soon. Greg, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I think I start out like every episode like this now. I'm trying to figure out a good way to just like segue right into an episode. But hey, man, I really thank you for coming on today.
Dude, I'm happy to be here. Very happy.
Yeah, this awesome, man. I do think this is going to be just as awesome as all the other ones. And I've spent a lot of time checking out your music, and man, I'm stoked to get into it.
Thanks, man. And yeah, I've listened to your podcast, and I hope that I can offer some other insight other than your previous guests who have all been pretty brilliant.
Dude, I am sure of it. No, I'm absolutely sure, but I appreciate that. I really do.
Yeah.
So you and I, we'd been talking for a little bit. We've been going back and forth on Instagram, and we were kind of looking to set up a time to do an episode. And then you actually went to New Zealand. So we're like, hey, can we postpone this for a while? I'm going on a trip, and when I get back, it's going to work out a little bit better. But I mean, that was super, super cool. So you took some time off, you did some traveling. I know there's a new album out now, and there's some connection between like this trip and the new album that's just come out, right?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I was there for 6 months and did a lot of music. You could say pretty much the whole album is inspired by being out there in a completely new place that was absolutely stunning, and meeting a lot of great people. And yeah, you could definitely say the new album's totally inspired by all those experiences. I was also learning how to be better on the road and on the move and traveling with a really light kit.
Ah,
And so the album is sort of part of that exploration too, is sort of getting really deep into a minimalist rig and seeing what you can do with it.
interesting. Yeah. So the new album, Glass Harbor, it's pretty dang recent. December 7th, I think I see here on Spotify. So,
Sure.
yeah, I definitely want to dig into the album. But what was the whole process of kind of jumping ship and going off to New Zealand for a while? Just like get away, see something new for a while. What was that like?
Well, I had a bunch of friends who were working on a film called Mulan. It's like the live action version of Mulan.
Okay,
So I had a chance to
cool.
kind of hang out with them while they were doing that and sort of be in the hub of that whole thing. And while I was there, I got some opportunities to do some commercial work, doing some jingles and that kind of thing.
Oh, nice.
Not
Cool,
just not
cool.
jingles. I would say it's more scoring. Jingles is
Uh-huh.
completely the wrong word, but yeah, no. So I did those, and I had a good amount of work to do while I was on the road. But
Uh-huh.
like I said, I had this smaller rig, and getting it all to kind of work while I was away from my main studio was a big challenge, but also kind of great because I got to learn some programs I hadn't known before a little bit better and get a little bit
Cool.
more agile, hopefully.
Yeah, no. So what did you bring with you then? Because of course, to jump in, like, and we'll get into it. I definitely want to jump into it, but the new album has almost a different feel from previous albums in the sense that I'm thinking of tracks like True Haven. So that was my favorite track off the
Oh,
album,
cool.
and yeah, and I loved how it was like. I don't mean to jump around here too much. We don't have to jump right into it, but there were parts to that track that it was like almost improvisation, excuse me, with some of the layers throughout that track. And I don't know, it just gave me a different feel from previous albums. So what I guess was the what were the components that you brought to the table for that album, and like what was that refined rig like?
Well, the goal of the rig is for it to fit in a backpack,
Yeah.
which sounds great until you realize, oh, I've got to bring a guitar with me. So then you need something else. And for my travel guitar, I use this guitar. It's called a SLG 200. I think it's by Yamaha,
Okay.
and it packs down really nicely into a kind of a miniature golf sized case, or miniature golf club case. I like to think of it as.
Uh-huh.
And the whole body like comes apart, and you put it inside this thing, and it travels well, and it sounds great plugged in. Um, it doesn't sound too piezo-y, if it's not a word, but I think people who play guitar will know what I mean. Um,
Uh-huh.
like there's a bit of a quack when you plug in with an acoustic guitar, and this one doesn't have it because its technology is more. It uses sampling instead.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know how exactly it works, but apparently it just knows where your fingers are, and when you pluck a string, you hear a sampled piece of guitar, and it kind of mixes with a piezo pickup to give it some humanity. And the result to me is pretty acoustic. It sounds pretty acoustic, and so, but it also eliminates the need for me to have a quiet room, which is probably the biggest challenge when you are on the road, is finding a place where you can get a clean sample. And to that note as well, I also traveled with a Neil Steinbrenner. Is that the brand? Well, it's an NS design violin.
Uh-huh. Interesting. That Yamaha that you mentioned, is that kind of like a hollow body? Because I had watched some videos that you had on YouTube where it looked like a hollow body guitar. Is that the same there, or is that different?
If by hollow body you mean it has no body, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was just the frame, and I was like, wow, that thing looks so interesting. And you know what? I may not have even noticed. So, do you mean then that there aren't like strings there? It's actually just picking up like where your fingers are on the fretboard, and then it's like sampling the actual sound of what that note should be.
No, it's definitely got strings.
Oh, okay.
And then when I say like that it knows where your fingers are, that might be completely erroneous. I don't know how that would be possible, but somehow it just works, and it sounds way better than like a piezo pickup would.
Interesting.
Because for me, that's very important. I just can't. I'm not a big piezo guy, and I know the guys that I work with aren't either. So
Uh-huh.
so it just ticked all the boxes for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was staying in hotels most of the time, so like I had refrigerator noise, air conditioning noise, builders, all that kind of stuff. So it was really crucial. And also when you have an electric, well, part of the album is having these videos to go along with it,
Right.
which means that you have to use loopers and that kind of thing if you want to have multiple layers and also have a live performance. So if I was going to use a looper with a microphone, I would have been pretty much hosed. But plugging in and using a looper with this Yamaha kind of works pretty well.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So then a lot of it was done, as you mentioned, like in hotels. It's noisy and maybe not, of course, as you mentioned, like the same setting that you had back home. Did that play into how you feel like the tracks came about then? Because yeah, I would imagine, right? It's gonna, of course, you're in a different setting. You're like on a different side of the world. All the things that are going on in your life, kind of playing into what inspires you for a track, must be very, very different.
Yeah, I mean, in one way, you were limited to the instrument itself, and you can't make layers that would be impossible to play live without some MIDI foot switches, which I did use, and also some loop pedals, which I also used.
Yeah.
And that being said, I did make a few mistakes that I would go back and correct later, and maybe add some layers on top of. But for the most part, I would say like 70 to 80% of the videos are the live performance with a little bit of like post cleanup in the background.
Yeah.
Actually, the True Haven song you mentioned, that's not done in New Zealand. That one's done in my mom's house.
Oh, okay. Man, that's impressive for being at mom's house and putting that thing out. Damn.
Well, I came home in between 3-month stints in New Zealand. And so in between, like I was home for August. And I got a few videos done while I was back in the States as well. So
I see. So then would you say that most times when you're putting out a given track, is there always that kind of like piece of the video that you're kind of keeping in the back of your mind as you put the actual song out? Like how does that look? Because then it kind of leads me to think like some of this might be like improvisation on the fly. Like how much of a given track is that, or how much is really kind of sat down and thought like, okay, this is the chord structure I want to base off of. This is the notes I want to kind of incorporate into a song.
Well, this one was more planned than my last one. My last album was this one called Scenes Volume 1. And
right.
there was supposed to be Volume 2, which was going to be this one, but it became so different that it just wasn't.
Yeah.
And Scenes Volume 1 is all pretty much sit down, sketch for 10 minutes, and then record and improvise.
Wow.
And that's like 20 songs of pretty much that. I think I did one a week for 20 weeks.
Yeah, no, I really, so I was listening to that and I really, I did get that feel. I got this feel that it's almost, and I think this plays into the fact that you mentioned you sketch it out for say 10 minutes and then kind of dig into a track and then see what comes, because with Scenes, I felt like I was almost there. I don't know. Cool. It just, maybe it was more of that like live improvisation piece that kind of came through the track that really made you feel kind of in tuned in that moment when you were making that song, something like that. I don't know. It definitely was a more distinctive, different feel than I will say Glass Harbor. And that's why I kind of wanted to dig into the both, because seeing that, of course, you know, traveling, that has to, and as you mentioned, have a big influence.
Sure. I think, with Scenes, there's a very improvisational character to it. But with Glass Harbor, I definitely wanted to create some more memorable moments, and also didn't want to take too many chances. I mean, I was pretty busy. And part of this whole YouTuber thing is is streamlining the process so your workflow is simple and doesn't years ago when I was doing these covers of acoustic covers of popular tunes, it would take me weeks to arrange something and then weeks to practice it, and then on the day of recording it, who knows like how many takes it would have taken.
Right.
I could have there were a few. There was more than 20 takes, and it got to
Yeah.
be a bit stressful because you get to the end of the song, you're like, okay, I'm about to make it. You start thinking about it, and you completely hose yourself.
Oh yeah, totally. I know. That's funny.
So Glass Harbor has a little bit more to the sketching. I think I would spend maybe a day sketching something out where the melodies are pretty memorable and they repeat like in popular music, and maybe give a few moments of improvisation. There are a few lead guitar kind of breaks in a couple of the songs. I can't remember which ones, but they're there. And so once I had all that sketched out, then I knew I could set up my MIDI foot switch and be able to switch around between tracks and then go for it.
Yeah. So what if you don't mind digging in there a little bit? So what's that process? Because I'm very new to incorporating a foot switch like that. So are you then recording maybe a loop and then that's going to play over? I used to use the DL4. So is it kind of the same idea as that, where it would replay that loop and then you can write again over it? So now you hear 3 or 4 tracks playing over one another.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. You'd want to set up your tracks before you start, obviously, and make sure if you've got a good idea of what effects you want to use. So when I use a tremolo, I usually have a really weird delay to kind of make it sound a little more full, and then I'll of course put a bunch of reverb on it and maybe a little bit of reverse, and so that's my tremolo. So I want to have that ready to go.
Yeah.
And then I want to have a clean guitar ready to go, maybe 2 or 3. And if all goes well, the MIDI foot switch will switch between the two while I'm recording. If all goes poorly, it doesn't work at all. It's pretty squirrely. But when it does work, it's always a good thing when it does.
Yeah. Well, that's so cool. I feel like that would be such a really useful tool to improvise, because you could have it there and you could start writing a given idea out and play with something. And then in the moment, you might say, okay, I want to go switch over to this given loop where I know I have tremolo lined up on that track, and then play with that. So I could see that it would be this really dynamic way to maybe come up with ideas for new tracks and really almost play with music in a live sense, almost, as you're going through and working on writing songs out.
I think that's kind of exactly what I'm going for. I'm still kind of refining the process. Like I said, mistakes are often something will not quite work during the performance, and I'll have to go back in post and kind of do a few extra sort of fixes or enhancements. Logic isn't quite set up for this. This is something you really have to sort of jury rig. And there's all kinds of plugins that help. MIDI foot switches, of course, help. It would probably help if I updated my operating system, which I'm terrified of doing.
Yeah. Well, where did that all kind of come about then? So was this something you kind of stumbled upon looking for ways to kind of enhance the way you're writing music, or what was that like? Because I'm guessing that, back, imagine 10 years ago you started playing guitar, I'm guessing, and then somewhere along the line it clicked where writing music was of interest. And then how did this kind of find its path as your mode of working on music?
Well, I think because it's a YouTube release through this Candy Rat Records label, and they just do amazing things on YouTube, great videos and great artists, and we having the video is part of the marketing, right? And I've always been a YouTuber myself, anyways. So
right.
So having something that's compelling on in a video form without me having to lip sync anything, is important. I feel like if you're genuinely playing it, it's a much more genuine experience, and the viewer might, hopefully, even if they don't realize, that's what it is, maybe their brain does, and
yeah,
you know what I mean? So
yeah.
I wanted to be able to do something just live, and that's kind of what the Glass Harbor album and videos are. But what my alternative is another album I did before Scenes, which was called Majestic, which is me I set up a camera to do a time lapse, and I just get started, and I can then everything's at my disposal at that point. I can use whatever I want to, It may not be as compelling because it's this weird like guy darting from one side of the room to the next, picking up instruments. But it was a more like robust album in that it had lots of instruments and
Right. Yeah,
sampling
yeah,
and
yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, when did the secondary instruments come in to play as tools to write this music? Because I've read, from your Patreon and from YouTube that the list of instruments it's huge. I mean, of course, guitar, but some instruments I'm not even very familiar with. So Ronroco,
All right.
Erhu, yeah, yeah. So I saw, and then watching some of those videos where you will splice different pieces on top of one another. You'll see the cello and all these different components. So when did that kind of come into play?
The new instruments. I fell in love with film music.
Yeah.
And there are a few like heroes that I have, like Gustavo Santaolalla. And his whole thing is, I mean, he's amazing at guitar, but he pulls out this other instrument, and I'd never heard of it either until I saw, I think, Babel.
Okay. Oh yeah, great movie. Yeah.
Well, Babel has the same track as this other movie, 21 Grams. They both
Okay,
have
I've
this,
never heard of that.
they both have this track by Gustavo that features his Ronroco playing. It's just gorgeous. And I knew it wasn't a guitar he was playing, so I'm like, I've got to find out what that thing is, and I've got to learn it and do what I can. So I found one, and turns out it's a lot like a 12-string.
Okay.
So not hard to adapt to if you're a guitarist already.
Right, right.
And I think following that sort of line of finding new sounds and new instruments, I started collecting all kinds of other stuff. And the big one that I got was a guitarviol, which is a cello.
Yeah.
With frets.
Oh, that thing looks so cool.
It's just sick. I
Yeah.
just love it. I think I've gotten more work in film with the guitarviol than I have on anything else that I've got. Because it makes me sound like I can play the cello, which is fantastic.
Yeah, so then I've seen pictures, and I think I saw maybe one video. Once I saw I think it was like maybe your YouTube profile picture with it, or maybe Patreon.
Yeah, sure.
I went and tried to do some digging, right, to see some live videos with it. So how then for the fretboard, top around the neck, it acts just as like a guitar, but then you're playing with as if the bottom end is a cello with the bow. Right?
Yeah, you bow it, and I mean, you could pluck it if you wanted, and it's still going to sound really interesting.
Yeah.
But the bow, I hold it underhand, which is a little different to a cello. But yeah, it's pretty much it's basically a cello, and it just has frets. And the frets are scalloped, so you can do glissando as well as all the other good stuff.
Oh yeah.
And actually, like I have played cello, like real cello. Since I got it, and I'm far better prepared to do that as a result. I'm really, really bad at it, and there are just amazing cellists out there, and I should just be hiring them to do my cello samples. But it's so nice to have this thing just right next to me at my desk, and I can just grab it.
Right. Yeah. And
pull out some cello riffs.
Yeah, no, and I think that's super important because, I mean, in the moment, if you're working on a track and say you want to pull in cello, now you have that as a tool kind of in your toolbox where you can go start recording. And I think personally that's going to have a lot of influence on, of course, the track versus, okay, I have an idea right now. I'll kind of leave a placeholder in here, maybe with like Contact or something. And then later on, maybe re-record it or something. Like you can do everything all in that moment and really be kind of dynamic in how you play with different tracks and move things in and out. So I'd imagine having all of those tools make a huge difference.
It really helps, and it helps you think in different ways, or in more improvisational ways. And the problem with contact cellos is that you're kind of stuck with one articulation at a time, or at least I am anyway. I've never figured out how to do the red keys, if you know what I mean, the key switches.
Oh yeah.
I've never messed around with those or become proficient at it. So you're stuck with one articulation, one sort of staccato note or a long note at a time. So it's hard to be fluid and think of melodies that incorporate the two, which are far more dynamic and more fun to listen to, I think. So I've never really come across a contact cello that I'm really terribly happy with. And I know there's tons of them out there. Maybe I should explore some more because I'm sure it would be good to to be able to use one.
Well, yeah, but it's also like very interesting that you find kind of what works best for you, right? And I mean, I think that's also super important is, you know, as you are putting out albums and you have this distinctive sound and this distinctive voice coming through, that comes by this maybe I don't want to say like trial and error, but like exploratory process where you find different instruments and things click, and then that's how these tracks come about, you know?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of experimentation and being awful at certain instruments, but with the magic of editing, it doesn't matter too much. I worry about my neighbors.
they hear the repeated like looping and readdressing a track. Yeah.
Well, luckily I've usually got my cans on when I'm doing the loops, but like with the Erhu, learning the Erhu.
Oh, that thing is so cool.
It is a cool instrument, but gosh, like if you don't know what you're doing, and I don't, it just sounds ridiculously bad, and takes a long time to sort of get a good sound out of it.
Can you explain, like for the people at home, what that looks like? Because right off the bat, when I read that Erhu, I had no idea what it was. So I watched some videos. I just searched it real quickly, and I think the sound is like as amazing as just the look of the thing too. It's totally interesting, and yeah.
I don't know how to describe. It's like a bowl that has a sort of drum head of snakeskin, and then a stem rising from that. That's sort of the amplifier, the bowl, and then the stem rises and has two strings coming down from the top that you can tune through these giant tuning pegs, and the bow is actually stuck between the two strings. So when you pull back, you're playing a bass, or not a bass. It's a sort of a mid range string, and then when you push forward, you're playing the higher trebles. And gosh, it's just a lot of fun. But it takes some practice, definitely.
Yeah. No, I would think that would be such a fun way to just continue. I mean, you know, as we had kind of spoken about, many albums, and being able to pull in different instruments over time kind of just keeps this as there's just no ceiling. You can always be growing in different sounds that you want to incorporate in tracks. And this is like a great example of like, hey, this thing looked really cool. It sounds awesome. Let's play with it and see what it can do with the music. And I mean, I definitely appreciate it when I've listened to your music and you can hear different elements that are, of course, not just guitar, right? They're more of like that orchestral cinematic sound coming from these different instruments. And then knowing that part of your process is experimenting with different instruments and having your real playing influence on it in the track, I think is super cool.
Cool, man. Well, I really appreciate that you feel that way.
Yeah.
Thank you, man.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. So, where do you see then kind of that piece going? I mean, do you just imagine moving into the future more and more instruments? I mean, is that something you kind of think you're going to take with you moving into to future albums?
Honestly,
more and more yeah.
Well, the thing I really want to do, for obvious reasons, is just get better at production. I'm in the middle of a bunch of challenges at the moment, and part of them is becoming more bombastic and just bigger. And there's a couple aspects of that challenge. One is to sort of stay myself and sound like me, and the other is to be able to kind of recreate popular trailer and film music, which is incredibly complex and loud and dynamic and hard for me to do. I don't know why. When I do try, it doesn't go quite where I want it to go. And keeping my own sound in those kinds of in that kind of music, well, gosh, it's just a real challenge. So I'm trying to get better and better at it. And I think it's going to take about a year before I'm sort of where I want to be. And actually, yeah, I think moving from a couple different DAWs might help Like we were talking a little bit earlier about Logic and Cubase and Ableton, and some might be more adept than others at certain types of music, and I'm not really sure which one is the best tool for what these days.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of from an outsider's perspective, I can see that bringing to the table your sound of like heavy use of acoustic guitar, of course, and these other instruments that you've incorporated. You're not going to see it at the beginning of like an action film, right? But that's okay, because like that's not really what your sound is. You know, it's just
That's a good point.
And I could really see it being at more of like right at like a very climactic emotional scene. Having your music tied with that would be explosive, right?
Sure.
So kind of the point I'm looking to make with that is that when I look at playing music for myself, right?
Yeah.
And it's totally for a hobby, but some of the stuff I make comes out a certain way, and I'm like, oh well, it maybe doesn't sound like that stuff over here, but taking that for what it is and allowing it to be what it is, then it kind of fits that slot, right? Maybe you'll find that the music you're making will continue to like fit this certain slot, and it will like evolve into something that you may not have even kind of thought it was gonna maybe address. I guess if I'm saying that right.
Sure. That's always a nice surprise when that does happen. And it's great to find a home for your specific sound. And I feel like in some ways that's happened. So I work with a composer named Johnny Klimek, who we work really well together. He gives me amazing direction, and I send him all kinds of cool samples, and they end up working well for his style of composition. He's just incredible. So that's worked out well. And also YouTube, you know, that's a bit of a home also.
Yeah.
But there are these composers out there who I really look up to. I feel like they can kind of do anything. Like they live in an action world and also a indie world and drama. They do everything. I mean, Hans Zimmer right now is at the total. He's in the total zenith.
That's right. Yeah, top of the top. Yeah.
And he just can do it all. I know he's got a huge team and a great team. But I just kind of feel like I need to, every time I listen to a score by him, I know I've got to up my game. And actually, not just listening to a score by him, but a score by any of the people you've interviewed before. So,
well, but I do think too, it's funny how you mentioned that. One, I think it's exciting because there's always room for growth for anyone, right? Like that's part of the fun of this whole thing. But I have had that same conversation with people where the music they put out, they're always like, you know, it's like, it's so funny that way because, you know, I will go to guys who like, I'm really just infatuated with like some kind of small niches of electronic music. And, you know, if I reach out to some of those artists, they're like, oh yeah, it was like, cool, I got it done. But like, have you heard this? And it's like, they'll point to someone else. I'm like, dude, but you know, so it's that same thing, right? I think the thing yourself you put out, right? It's always lacking. You know, I think that's just a human trait. So it's this whole balance. But I see what you're saying, right? And that does make it fun looking into future projects because for anyone, there's always room to improve and looking up to some of these people who are, you know, maybe 10 steps farther down the road right now, and they're like older, mid-career type of things. Like, of course, right, there's things to look to emulate there or work towards. But man, from what I've heard with everything in your repertoire, I think you nailed it perfectly when you said like indie. I could see it like perfectly fitting in some indie films and just like totally exploding the scene based on what you bring to the table with your sound.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
I hope so.
No, for sure. But that's cool. So now this has been like a long process. I mean, and one thing I want to dig into, as you mentioned, a lot of this is tied closely with YouTube. So that's something that hasn't really even come up on a given episode. But one thing that caught me was when you said you were in New Zealand, you're of course tied to releases on YouTube, and there's this whole process behind it because as I understand it, with, you know, releasing this podcast now, putting out that content on these platforms is super important. So what it like kind of on a scheduled manner, right? And it's like there's always this high consumption for content. So what's that been like, kind of growing as an artist, having this thing move in parallel with this YouTube channel has really grown? Have there been like struggles there? Has it just kind of clicked along the way as a good platform to show out your music?
Well, certainly, it's YouTube's been the biggest help in getting my music out there, and I'm lucky. I'm really, really lucky that certain videos, and I don't know why. I mean, it's impossible to set a formula, because when I try that and then try to recreate the formula, it just fails miserably. I'll give you an example. I'm just lucky that some of them have hit and drawn in some people. And one of them, my most successful one, is an acoustic cover of Clint Mansell's Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah.
And that one just went crazy. Not as crazy as some, but I mean, for me, it went crazy. And I'm like, okay, so popular song with maybe, a bit of a following. Great. So who's the most popular YouTuber at the moment, and what's her most popular song? Well, the answer is Rihanna, and the answer at the time was Where Have You Been? If you remember.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'll just cover that, and I'll be famous in a couple of days. And do you know, it didn't work out.
Yeah.
So I have no idea like how it works. I think you just have to be consistently posting things that you're inspired to do, and hopefully you produce some stuff people want to listen to. That's probably, I think your chances are better the more you post. And getting shared on these aggregate websites used to be really important. Like, do you remember Mashable and like Devour?
Oh yeah.
Awesomer, those guys. I noticed if I ever got shared with them, it would give me a big boost. So anybody who's doing this should probably look into establishing a relationship with some aggregate channels. They're kind of going by the wayside now, or maybe their traffic is a little less because Reddit is so popular, and Facebook is they're such popular aggregates. But they're definitely still worth reaching out to. And YouTube, just has been great. And over the period of a couple of years, I got too busy to keep up what I had been doing. And so I've been looking for a quicker workflow, like I said, and that's kind of also led to the way the videos are now, which is very sketched, improvisational, and then honed later.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the aesthetic you have for those, the new, I honestly don't notice and I mean this as like a great compliment, is I don't look at those videos, the new ones, and feel as if it's like sketched and it's like a shorter time from start to finish to get it out. I think great. The aesthetic behind it. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the aesthetic behind it, I think having it like, so some of the new ones are like black and white. It has you right there. You're playing. I mean, all that stuff is for a viewer so important, right? Because I can actually see like the emotion in your face as you're like playing. I can see the intent behind the different notes. So I think that stuff is, it's funny because it was almost, as you mentioned, maybe like a little bit like there's less resistance, kind of to put it out in that format, but it's more real, it's more raw. And I think for a viewer, it's just as interesting, if not more interesting.
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad you feel that way. And that's all. I thought of all of that. I'm like, how can I keep this as genuine as possible? And in my mind, I personally prefer music like this, where it is a little more simplistic in that. I mean, my acoustic covers are very busy and a bit frantic. And while the playing is more complex, I think for guitarists they might enjoy it more. But I personally enjoy music that's more kind of drony and ambient. So for me, this is more kind of in my current headspace.
Yeah, I like how you have approached it that way. And it was funny that actually came to mind today with different music I was listening to. And I forget the track now exactly that I was listening to, but it was very simple, and they weren't I think it was one given artist in a remix of a track, and they weren't trying to throw way too much at you too quickly. And I noticed that might be something I would do. I'll get to like, okay, there's not enough going on in this. Throw things at it. And sometimes if you like, for myself, if I remove myself and I'm just trying to like observe how I feel listening to music, that very simplistic growth of a song over time, and it might take a minute to really like build up to this momentous part of a track. That's better than
Yes.
than trying to jump in and what I found that I myself have done in the past is just throwing things at it, and then it's just a mumbled piece of junk for me, So I think you really tuned into something well there. It's like this raw portrayal of the song in the moment while you're recording it, and it's like simple, but it's beautiful too.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like I do the same thing, man. I start off big, and hopefully at some point I realize like, geez, this could be so much better if I just stripped all this out, began with something else, and slowly built up to what I started with.
Yeah.
I think I'm just realizing that myself. In fact, one of these big challenges I'm facing is one of those situations. I was just saying to myself today, I need to kind of just take everything and mute. Every track except for the first one. And then I'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny how that happens too. Is people have mentioned this on given episodes too, and I found it playing with music myself. Is sometimes you don't find that thing that clicks into a track until 2 or 3 minutes in, and it's like one thing that sticks out, and you're like, oh wait, no, go rip everything. This is
right.
like the central part of what I want to frame everything else around, and I want to go run with that. Yeah. So then. I know we've been kind of talking about it in how you put a lot of these tracks together, where it's kind of in parallel with the video portion, and a lot of it is kind of sketched out and recorded live. But do you find, aside from these pieces, that there are certain things that really kind of add to your process in writing songs, different kind of creative pieces, maybe different times of the day, different sets and settings, things like that for yourself that really like cue you in? You're like, okay, this is really working for while I work on music, or anything of that sort.
Do you mean like just in terms of composing? What's my method? Or
Yeah.
It depends on what the project is. If it's just for me, I'm usually just sitting with my guitar. And I love to create a space through Logic or whatever the DAW is. And by that I mean putting on a bunch of reverb.
That makes reverb does make everything sound beautiful.
I just my favorite memories of playing guitar are when I found like an empty room with no furniture, no carpets, or a stairwell, and you couldn't pull me out of there. I would just be in there playing for hours. And so when computers became more, I've been playing forever, so I didn't always have a computer to record with. When I was able to recreate a space like that in a DAW, it just made my practice all that much more fun. And so now I don't play without cans on. I've always got headphones on whenever I play.
Yeah.
And inevitably something cool happens, and I just start recording a memorable phrase or something like that, and then I kind of usually build off of that. Sometimes I hear something like in the car or in the shower, and I will take a note of it on my phone and then make something out of that. So it can be many different sort of beginnings, but eventually I always end up in front of my computer, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that too, because I am kind of fascinated where you can be doing something totally random, and me personally, I always have music in my head, which I don't think is great now in retrospect. Now that I'm almost 30, I don't think that's what's supposed to be happening. But oftentimes, I'm like humming a song in my head, or kind of kind of singing in my head and stuff, and then things will click, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a cool little like melody that just kind of stuck out right there.
Right.
yeah, going straight to the phone, recording it. I've heard other people do the same. I think that's really cool, because I think that mind wandering piece oftentimes can you kind of disengage, and you can be just totally kind of head in the clouds, and something will pop into your head, and you're like, "Ooh, that caught. That's interesting. I want to go play with that."
And sometimes I'll even there's a technique I've heard of. I bet there's a term for it, but I don't really know what it is. But for me, when I'm surrounded by white noise, like severe white noise, I'll definitely hear music within it.
Whoa!
You can either, I think the best way to do it is either driving with the windows down, or maybe even better, having a fan that's a bit loud and just cranking it up to 11. And,
oh, that's interesting.
I'll definitely, if I sit with that, something will come. I know it'll come. And if I'm stuck, I do tend to do this. I will sit in a space where there's some serious white noise going on. In fact, on YouTube, there's if you put in oscillating fan, and you have a good sound system, you'll be in heaven. Unless you hate white noise, some people do. But if you like it, you'll be in heaven. You will find something in the white noise will come out.
That is so cool. I've never heard of that, and I haven't had enough experience to think, being, or tune into that at least, right? So it hasn't clicked in my own experience where that gets me into a space where I'm like kind of humming songs in my head, or things are coming to me. But that's so cool that you found over the years that's like a method almost, where that'll kind of get you in a creative space and kind of have melodies pop into your head.
Sure. Just don't bring your phone and get lost on Facebook or whatever. I think you kind of just have to kind of sit with it. Even close your eyes and take a nap. I think it might even come as you're waking up or as you're going to sleep. It's important to kind of maybe slow down and look for the melodies if you need to.
Right.
And I often need to. And just one other thing about method.
Yeah.
If I'm on my guitar, that's one thing. But sometimes I'm working on projects that don't call for guitar at all, and in that case, I love exploring the piano, and also I've got a lot of great contact samples that are also really fun to play with, and creating space again through reverb and other effects, and exploring like how I can make those samples my own somehow or different to how they come in the box. That's always important to me.
Oh yeah.
And just doing that, you find melodies and that kind of thing too that would hopefully be impressive to the client.
Yeah, it's funny how as you mentioned that, going into Contact or going into whatever DAW you use and pulling up Contact and playing with different sound libraries, how one, you mentioned you want to kind of tailor that to a specific sound you're looking for that's unique. But I found even just kind of cycling through presets, if I'm playing the same chord, sometimes just cycling through and that different Contact library, whatever that is, whatever preset it is, clicks and you hear that chord in a totally different way. And you're like, oh, wait, okay, this, I like it will kind of spring out at you. And then that can be something just you're kind of off to the races then with. Right. So, yeah,
that's true. Presets are fun and easy.
Yeah. And easy, yeah. Cycling through and seeing what clicks. Yeah. Sure. It is going back to kind of setting up good settings for like melodies to pop in your head. It's so weird to me that artists, yourself find ways to kind of help that, kind of nurture that process, and kind of little tricks to almost get into that space a little bit more easily, because the whole idea of melodies popping into a person's head are so bizarre one to start with. You're there and you're thinking of kind of just trying to disengage and play with some music, and for that just to kind of come out of nowhere and almost be gifted and then find ways to get there a little bit more easily are so strange. And it's cool that and it's cool that I just am fascinated that you found this method that kind of gets you there.
Well, it gets even weirder because it's not like I'm humming it in my own head, as people say.
Right.
It's more like I'm actually hearing it, like through my ears. I can actually hear it. It's like I mean, maybe it's a schizophrenic episode or something, but it isn't. So no, it's really interesting how it manifests.
No. I mean, I've experienced the same thing, so I
Yeah.
know what that is. Where you feel like you're hearing the music, and it makes a person wonder if there is. I have to assume there's like a spectrum there, right? Of people that might be a little bit more tuned into that, or can get there more easily, or that experience is more kind of extreme, if you will, and overwhelming, and that can push someone more into like, I'm going to use this. I think this almost inspires me to go work on music a little bit more, and that kind of stuff would be really fun to like know more about what that even is, because I have no idea.
Sure.
I've liked to play with those as just like weird thought experiments as to what it even is. But yeah, it's cool because as you mentioned, you're hearing it. It's not like you're humming it. It's not like there's an actual exterior auditory influence. It's your mind, but you feel like you're actually hearing that music.
I feel like we're kind of writing the sequel to A Beautiful Mind, except we're using a musician and not a mathematician.
Right. That's what we need on the next couple. It'll be a series of episodes of like figuring out what that thing even is.
Right. And then we both
yeah.
eventually end up in like an sane asylum.
Yeah, the music gets worse, but we like figure out more of what it is that creates music. Yeah, because part of it is you can't force it. It's like it's this weird concept of like when you kind of try and zone out a little bit, or when you're not forcing it. In my opinion, my experience, that's when things that are really beautiful can come through. And I found with myself, if I'm like, okay, I got to write the song right now, like it's got to sound like this, it's like it's going to be horrible. So yeah,
it might not. You never know. You'll have. I bet you'll have in your experience a magic moment where it just comes out perfect. You don't have to revisit, unless that's just not your personality.
Well, yeah. That's another thing too, is I think from conversations I've had, and this being a great example, is everyone approaches it in a different way a bit, and some it's more iterative on like say a DAW and very like meticulous in selecting notes. More are more or others are more improvisation based, right? And it all kind of gets funneled through experience, and trial and error, and what works for a person and what doesn't.
I mean, there are people that actually write notes on paper.
Yeah.
I can't believe it.
Yeah. Yep.
They're amazing.
Same.
They astound me. I actually can't read music. I'm not trained that way.
I can't either. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I can slowly read it. It's been years, but I really do respect musicians who are like the Mozarts of today who can do it.
Well, I'm guessing that when you were growing up, it clicked more easily just to pick up the guitar and play chords and understand just by ear what sounds right, and and you could kind of listen to songs and be like, okay, I understand kind of what's going on here based on this chord structure, versus more of like an analytical approach of like reading the music and understanding the theory behind it.
Yeah, that's true. And for some reason, modes clicked with me more than other types of theory or other aspects of theory. I always think in terms of modes now. For some reason, those really stuck when I was studying scales and that kind of thing.
How do if you don't mind sharing that? I'm not very familiar there.
Modes are like there's terms for them like Mixolydian, Lydian, Aeolian, Dorian. So if you look them up, they all have a very distinct. Phrygian's my favorite because it's very Spanish Andalusian sounding. Anyway, if you study those, for people that have a good ear, I think you kind of remember them. You remember the scales, and you might go to them a little easier than you would classical theory.
I see. Okay. Yeah. That's that's a realm I've never really digged into all that much, and it's fascinating, but it's something I'm not familiar with at all. And it would be, I think, really interesting to even have a dedicated conversation around theory in general, because that in itself is bizarre as well. Sure. It's like this organization of notes in this particular manner sound pleasing to the ear, whereas these ones don't. You know, it's like, what is that too? It's funny.
I think it would be a short conversation because I'm just sitting here with my piano, and I just play the black keys, man.
Right.
That's really all. That's how I find my way around, and that's pretty much my limit. I don't know anything else about it other than the black keys sound good together.
Yeah. No, I noticed the same thing too. So, and it was funny. My girlfriend's friend was over one night and she noticed I was like on my little MIDI keyboard playing on black notes only. And she teaches piano and she teaches young kids. And she mentioned there's a reason for that. It's like you don't come into any like half notes or something as you like play. So everything is pleasing on the black keys, or there's something to, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Cause you can do like, a 12th or, between like, C sharp and C sharp in your left hand and then play pretty much whatever in the black keys. It's going to sound pretty good,
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I wish I knew exactly what that was.
Same. I'll do some digging. I'll pass it to you after. I mean,
cool.
But it's funny. Yeah, it's just you find what really works, and it comes through like an exploratory process, and it's so cool to see because really all these little paths that you've taken over the years, like picking up different instruments that have been incorporated into the sound, the way that you've now kind of pieced film next to the live performance aspect with the new album. It's so cool because all those little things in parallel lead to what your sound is. And I think that all those little unique pieces are so cool, and it's like so interesting to dig into those.
Thanks, man. Yeah. It's just a lot of fun. I'm motivated to sit with it and do it.
Yeah.
Because I love the process. I really do.
Yeah. So then moving kind of into future projects, do you see yourself? I know we kind of talked about where you'd like to see this going, but are you focusing more on film and like the application there, or is that something you'd like to just kind of see in parallel with the solo music, or what's that look like?
I'm totally in love with film music, and I have been for a long time. And if I'm getting more and more gigs, which is great. So I'm happy to concentrate on those and just get better and better at it. I did spend 2 years ago, I think I started doing these videos that I would rip popular film scenes and score.
Oh yeah, I saw those, yeah.
Do my own score to them. And that taught me how to kind of hit moments, have a sting at this particular moment or that particular moment, which can seem pretty tough to do at first, but once you get into the bones of it with logic, it makes it quite easy, which is great. I remember asking Johnny, like, how in the world do you do this? And he said, that's the easy part. It's getting the emotion. That's the hardest part. And he was totally right.
Yeah.
So getting better at all of that is sort of hopefully in the future, and getting more gigs and working with more directors and finding people that want to work with me. That's sort of all in the cards, and I'll continue doing the solo stuff because it's working out pretty well. So
yeah,
I'm going to juggle all of it, man.
That's awesome. That's what, that's the best answer. But it is so cool to hear that you are honing it in as well, kind of with the film. And you mentioned that experience you've had writing, giving compositions over distinctive film clips, and that actually hasn't been expressed in the past, where it's like you have to and I mean it makes sense, but as you look at a given scene from start to finish, you have to find these high points of like emotion, and now you almost have to work backwards and say, okay, well, I know at say like 2 minutes, like there's this really like iconic top of like emotion in this track, and you have to kind of work it so that it builds up to there 2 minutes in, and then like it almost morphs to the film itself.
Sure. I mean,
yeah.
Ideally.
Ideally, yeah. Right.
It's fun to play with notes and have notes like that from directors and see how close you can get to their original vision, and it's really important to be agile and be able
Yeah.
to change everything quickly. So that's been another thing I've been working at.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, and I think that's echoed a lot by, like Julian Cisneros was on a couple episodes back now, and he's done a lot with film and television
Right.
composing, and he mentioned a lot of that. It's like being able to jump in. It's like, oh, this is going to be a pirate film, right? Like,
Yeah.
hopefully I can sit down and write something that's tied really well to like a pirate theme, or be able to work with that director. It is cool that there are a lot of moving parts. Like, it's not just you. It's, unless you're doing the film and directing, and which could honestly be really cool. But if you're working with all these other people on a project, there are a lot of different inputs into what's happening, and managing that and still having the uniqueness of your sound. It's I think it would be a really interesting balance to try and play with and manage as you go through a project.
And it's always going to be different too, depending on the project and the people. But it is absolutely awesome when you find a team who can help a lot through their personal skills, even if it's not music at all. Like if you find a great editor who can take your stems and make them into something completely different. I've had that a few times, and it's been glorious. Like,
oh yeah,
I send them my full mix and then the stems as well, and they come back with something that's very, very different, but also sounds way, way more amazing than what I delivered. I'm like, yeah.
That's interesting.
You guys use that, please. Please do.
Well, that's cool, because then it's like a collaborative process, and
Exactly.
and yeah. And I think people don't maybe even realize as much when they sit down and watch a movie of how collaborative they are. It's not one person wrote the film and here it is. It's so many people coming together with their input and driving this thing to a finish line, and all the actors and the music. I mean, it's this whole group of people that come together and really put something out. So it's super collaborative process.
It is, yeah. And hopefully, I mean, it's always different. We never know who is responsible for what sometimes, and I sometimes I just want to ask those composers what the experience was like, and but I don't know any of them, so I will never know unless you interview them. So
well, yeah, I mean, I have those same thoughts, right, for like totally opposite spectrum. Like when I work on music, I'm really just like in love with Deadmau5's record label Mousetrap. Yeah. And so that's kind of where this did stem a little bit, but asking these types of questions, it's like, how? Because I'll listen to tracks and I'm just like, okay, this is literally amazing. And what's this process like? And the crazy thing is a lot of times the person, and I mentioned this earlier, but the person that makes it will oftentimes be like, it was okay. There's part of that. And I'm like, oh, you're crazy. This is so good. Or it can be hard to define too. It's like, I've been working on music for a long time. I work on it daily, and this is what I can do. And a lot of the times these questions are hard to pinpoint, and that's what makes it so like interesting, so exciting. That music, I think there's no ceiling to, right? You can always write a better song. It's like you can't really, I don't know, it's so strange.
One of my favorite covers that I've done is Deadmau5's Strobe.
I didn't know you had done that.
I did an acoustic Strobe. It came out okay. It came out all right. But I also got
it on your...
It's on my YouTube. Yeah, you can find it.
Oh, I got to go find that. I missed that. That's awesome.
But I got his masterclass, and I haven't gone through the whole thing, but it is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
First couple videos that I saw were like, oh, okay, I should have been doing that all along.
Well, yeah, he's an interesting guy because he doesn't play piano at all. Everything's in the DAW.
Yeah, right. Drawn in. Sure.
Yeah. So people find what works, and it's. I mean, and of course he's writing crazy music. So you can do this in so many different ways, and it will lead to totally different outputs. And because I know on the opposite spectrum with electronic music producers, there are some artists that are more like almost have like a live component to the music that they play too. So it's just it's cool. That's so cool you did Strobe. Okay, so I just bookmarked it. I'm definitely watching that.
Let me know what you think. Could be
Oh,
fun.
I totally will. I love that song, so I will definitely let you know. Yeah, that's sweet. And I actually I hadn't done the masterclass, so I want to look into that. I've heard good things about it, so I definitely want to check it out.
I'm a big fan of them, but I never finish them. That's my problem. I always get, I don't know, they're hard to, I don't know. I've got to figure out how to fit them in. I never finish them. I have like 6. So I'm spending the money. I might as well.
Yeah, it's there. Luckily, they're there, so it's
Yeah.
not like they're going away.
Hopefully
yeah,
not.
I know. I think Hans Zimmer has one too.
He does.
Is that?
He does.
Yeah. Have you checked that one out?
I have. I've watched a few of those, and he's awesome. He's just great.
Yeah, I would like to check those out too. I'm fascinated with all of this is just like for fun, but I am fascinated with that totally different world of like composing for film, and having these conversations around it is always super cool because it's really foreign to me, and I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, there are a few scores that like totally pulled me in and never let go. And
what would those be?
One of them, well, 2 were by Cliff Martinez, and one was Traffic. There's this one track called Helicopter. It's just I just had it on repeat for years, and it's just awesome. It creates this wonderful, wonderful space for me. And then he scored Solaris.
Okay.
And that score for me was just out of this world. I thought it was amazing. It's very simple.
Okay.
It's not too busy. It's very ambient. But for a sci-fi film, it just fits so well. And yeah, I listened to that on repeat for quite some time too.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, and then the Gustavo Santaolalla, anything by him. Yeah. So yeah, as soon as I heard that stuff, I was like, yeah, this is kind of where I want to live. And getting there has been a bit of a long road, but it's starting to get a little faster. It's good. So.
That's awesome. Hey, I mean, but the what you've done so far is just equally as incredible. So I mean, it is cool, but it's also exciting to have like kind of this path that's forming in front of you, and like, you know, you've done a ton so far. Now you're like, okay, I kind of see it moving in this direction, which is really cool.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. I'm gonna go check out both Solaris, and I've seen Traffic. I think I've seen Solaris too. I may not have, but I'll go check out the soundtracks for both. I do you know who? Have you seen the movie Moon by chance?
Oh yeah, Moon was great. Clint Mansell, love him.
Yeah, that clicked with me too. I was watching that, and that's when I was like, oh. Composing for film is really interesting because he had like an electronic feel to it, and that clicked for me. I was like, okay, this is really, really cool. And it's cool when something there clicks because it's with the movie, it's the soundtrack, it's like both in parallel that are like making this thing that's better than 2 of the standalone pieces, you know. And it's yeah.
And his score for The Fountain also blew my mind. Blew my mind. I think he worked with the Kronos Quartet on that.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I'll check all this out because I'm always looking for like new stuff to listen to, and I have been getting more and more just to listen to for fun, but more and more into soundtracks.
Well, make sure you balance it out a little bit with some like Alexandre Desplat, which is happy. I would consider his stuff very irreverent. But everything I've mentioned before is a bit morose. I just I don't want you to go to a dark place, my friend. That's all.
That's okay. That's okay. I like to listen to, I think a lot of the electronic music that I really enjoy can kind of go to dark place. I think some of the deadmau5 tracks are really there. It just depends on which ones you listen to, but they can just be like super emotionally charged.
They are emotionally charged.
That's the stuff. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. I love that stuff.
I love it too, but I did notice years ago, I was overdoing it. And it affected my mood. So I learned to kind of balance it out with something more happy, irreverent, I like to say. And it helped. It definitely, like some Gilbert and Sullivan in between all of it might help you if you need it. You sound like a happy guy though, so that's great.
It depends on. No, but I do. I totally noticed that because I think you'll agree if you go into working on a track and it's supposed to be really emotionally intense that either for a given project you're working on or solo work or whatever, you'll leave and you'll be drained. Like you'll finish it and you'll literally, yeah. And then if on the contrary, if you're working on something happier and upbeat, you know, it can like, it can give you energy, you know? So
true.
Yeah, you have to be careful because I know exactly that feeling that you mentioned is it can, if you're not careful, you surround yourself with too much of this beautiful music, but if it's like really emotionally charged, you leave and you're like, oh, gotta balance it out.
Right. Time to go watch some cartoons.
Exactly. Well, that's sweet, man. I mean, I love having these conversations. I'm fascinated with your process so far because I do think it's cool and it's very unique, and the way you put together music is so unique, and how you've kind of built this platform on YouTube is really cool. And I really see it going in a really cool and interesting direction. And I feel like in a year or two, of course I want to stay in touch, and we can, of course, if you'd like, do more episodes down the road, but I feel like these things will like even more piece together, and it will be a very interesting path.
Yeah, man, that would be awesome. And if you ever make it to LA, you're welcome to come in. I'd love to look at your process too, because I'm sure you could teach me some awesome electronic music stuff.
No, I'd love to go to LA, but me teaching you, it's a whole jumbled mess.
I bet it's great.
But
I bet it is.
But I appreciate that, man. I really do. My girlfriend's sister is in LA, and we're planning to make a trip out there. So
cool.
I'd love to do it. Yeah, and
dude, let's get a coffee.
Now, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do it. I seriously, and what's really cool about this music world is everyone is releasing music online, working on music on their computers. So you find so many people are there to chat with a lot. Like I use Discord a lot. So there's like communities of just musicians, or wherever, Instagram. And it's cool to have started to get to know people in this world because everyone's so friendly, and then there's people everywhere. So like, you know, now I want to go to LA and we can meet up, and it's really cool.
Yeah, man. It is.
Yeah,
it's a good community to be in.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great people.
Yeah, totally, man. Totally. Well, hell yeah. Well, I do, man. I appreciate it. I'm really thankful that we could make this work out. And I thought it was just a perfect time because you just put out the new album, and just back from New Zealand recently. So this worked out just perfectly, man.
I really appreciate you asking me on. I really do.
Of course. Yep. And if you want to do it again in a year, 6 months, whatever it is, I would be more than happy. I'd love to do it. So we'll do it if you want to do it.
Okay, man. Awesome.
Cool, man. All right. Well, thanks again. All right, that's it for episode 20. Thank you to Acoustic Labs for coming on, having this conversation. I really appreciate it. And also thank you to 1=0 for sharing out their music at the beginning of this episode. Make sure to go check out both. Again, I'll just quickly put in those places to find them. For 1=0 at SoundCloud at 1-0 FFICIAL, or for Acoustic Labs, check them out on YouTube at Acoustic Labs, patreon.com/Acoustic Labs. You can find him on Spotify. His music's up there on Amazon. So really go check out his music, show your support. And that's it. So we will have more episodes coming, of course, on Wednesday. Look for new episodes, and I hope to speak with you all again soon.